All right, hey everybody. Wish that I could be there with all of you guys. I am feeling a bit better today, but still glad I'm not there, potentially spreading germs. So today we're going to be talking about the case. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. I just muted the volume, but you were coming in perfectly.
Yeah, I'm hearing a much delayed echo at the moment.
Is he hearing echo on his end?
All right, cool. Sounds good. Yeah, I was getting a delay, so I couldn't tell if it was
It's a big delay.
me or not. So what we're going to be talking about today is the case of the flying wall. We're going to be talking about a particular piece of malware called Fruit Fly. Fruit Fly it is very interesting, kind of old malware, and there's some legal issues involved here. So we're going to have some interesting stories. So a little bit about me. First of all, I am Thomas Reed. I work for Malwarebytes, and the reason I'm talking about this is that we were the first to write about malware, and there's an interesting story around that as well. So we're going to get into that. So a little bit about Fruit Fly. First of all, it was a very unique all-purpose backdoor. It consisted of a Perl script that contained a number of helper processes. And these were all at the end of the Perl script in the data block. And the main Perl script would extract and run them under certain conditions. And this is fairly unique among Mac malware. I don't think I've ever seen a piece of Mac malware do the same thing. So the main first stage Perl script, the main task that it did was communicating with the command and control server and executing some commands with the assistance, in some cases, of these helpers. These helpers would be extracted and run under certain conditions when certain commands were received. And one of the things that this malware would do, which is common to most backdoors, is exfiltration of data, and it was particularly interested in any kind of images or audio. So anything through the microphone, anything through the webcam, screenshots, you name it, that sort of stuff. It was very interested in that data. So if we look at the Perl script, it's fairly simple overall, and we're just going to look at a short snippet of it. This Perl script basically loops through a loop every 10 seconds, and it sleeps and then just waits for 10 seconds. Each time through, it will read one byte from the command and control server. And depending on what that byte, what number that is, it will execute different commands. And so, for example, we're showing here that byte 2 would be the command to do a screen capture. And so it would use just standard macOS pre-installed commands. We use the screen capture command to capture the screen to temporary folder. It would then read that image right into memory, and finally it would write that image out to socket. sending it back up to the command and control server. So this is just an example of one thing that it did. It could also do things like capture images through the webcam. It could download files. It could execute arbitrary commands. You name it. It's got all the standard command and control behaviors. One really interesting thing about this is that looking into the mock-O binary, that was one of those helpers in the data section of Perl, it contained a lot of really ancient code. And I'm talking really like dating back to the early days of the Mac. So in particular, one of the sets of APIs that it would try to call are GWorld related calls. If you're old like me, you might remember those from the late 80s, early 90s, when I actually had to read the old Inside Macintosh books to get information about how to use GWorld calls, because the internet didn't really exist yet. Not in such a form that I could look things up on Apple's website. So that was really, really very interesting, and it suggested that this malware had been around for a while. Now, we're not going to go too deep into details here, so if you're really interested in learning more about this malware and more about what it does, I highly recommend Patrick's paper that he wrote for Virus Bulletin. This paper is it's really comprehensive, has a lot of good details in it, and you're going to be hard pressed to find a better source for information on this malware. So at this point, we're going to kind of shift gears a little bit, and we're going to start looking at the story of the malware and how this malware came about, who is responsible, and what's happened to that individual. So we go all the way back to January 4th of 2017, and that's when the story more or less starts. Now, it kind of went back further than that, but nobody knew about it yet. So on January 4th in 2017, Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland was notified of an infection by a third party. We don't know exactly who that third party was. That information has not been made public. But this third party shared indicators of compromise that allowed Case Western to look through its systems and find the infection. And they found that they had more than 100 systems that were infected with this malware. So the next day, of course, they contacted the FBI. The FBI began their investigation. And just a day later, on January 6th, the FBI already had a suspect that they had identified. So what the FBI found is that the computers that were compromised had been compromised for several years without this malware being detected. And one interesting thing they found that a particular IP address that was being used by the malware was also being used or had been used to access an alumni email account belonging to Philip Roman Durachinsky. So that's a pretty major OPSEC fail, and it led to Philip Durachinsky becoming a suspect in the creation and distribution of this malware. So then a few days later, January 10th, I learned about this malware from a Slack, the MacAdmin Slack, one of the channels there. Somebody that I knew posted a message saying that he found this hidden file at the root level of the user directory on one of his systems. And this was at a Midwestern medical center connected to a university. And he was curious what this thing was and what it was doing. And so he provided me with a copy of the file. And I started analyzing it, found some very interesting things. Found a lot of the things that we've already discussed and more. And very quickly realized that this was malware. So started working on a write-up for it. Now, between then and the 18th, when we actually published our blog post, I did contact Apple, made them aware of malware, and for the first time, I actually got a response back, and I got some information back from Apple. They wanted me to hold off on the blog post for just a little while, and it turned out that the FBI was already investigating, which I was not aware of at the time, and they wanted to give the FBI extra time to do their investigation. So we agreed that we'd publish on January 18th, and so at 10 a.m. we published our blog. The same day, there was also an MRT update that began detecting this malware via Apple's malware removal. So then about 12 hours later, same day, the FBI raided Durachinsky's place of residence, so the address that they traced to this IP. And the house turned out to belong to Durachinsky's parents. They lived there, and he sometimes would stay there on the weekends, so he didn't really live there anymore. The FBI asked if they could enter, and were allowed. They were invited in. Interestingly enough, Durachinsky's parents told the FBI that he'd been in trouble for hacking in high school. I'm not sure why they would say that to the FBI, and knocking and asking about their son. So that's interesting. It's an interesting little tidbit. Not sure that I entirely understand it. And the FBI was shown into Durachinsky's bedroom, where they found a laptop that was just slightly ajar, according to the court documents. And it was currently on, and it was being remote controlled at that moment. So obviously the FBI was concerned about deletion of the evidence. They were concerned that Durachinsky was remoting into the machine and deleting everything that could tie him back to this malware. They were concerned that he'd been tipped off by some guy who published a blog post. So the FBI very quickly pulled the plug on the router to prevent any further activity, whatever was going on the laptop, and they confiscated the laptop and a number of hard drives and other electronic. And they took that with them when they left. So just a few hours later, in the wee hours of the morning on January 19th, the FBI got a warrant to access the data that was on those drives in that computer. And when they began investigating, they found over 20 million collected files that were collected from thousands of victims. And among the data that was found were a number of child pornography files, which is highly disturbing. So, I guess it took the FBI a little bit of time to gather all this data, gather all the evidence, and so it wasn't until January 25th that Durachinsky was finally arrested. Now, a little time passed here, a couple of months, and the FBI in late March issued a flash with details on the malware to select affected companies. This flash was originally issued as TLP Amber, meaning it can only be shared with people in the same company. Since that time, it has been leaked online and is now public knowledge, so I don't feel too bad about sharing some of the details here. And one of the interesting things there was that the Flash shared technical details about how the malware got onto the computers. They said that the attack vector included use of weak passwords or passwords that had been leaked by third-party data breaches. And that the person behind it, Durchinsky, allegedly, used a number of different remote access protocols to upload these files to the victim systems. So everything from, back to my Mac, SSH, VNC, pretty much anything that might have been enabled on the Mac to allow remote access. Now, for a long time, we didn't know exactly how these files got uploaded. We knew that he got this remote access, kind of figured that maybe he just uploaded the files and activated them manually since it wasn't particularly complex malware. It was just one file, one plist, one launch-aided plist. But it turns out, just last week, Pedro, or OSX Reverser as he's known on Twitter, had the Docker script for a couple of years and hadn't been able to release it because of his former employer. He decided that since this talk was coming up, he was going to go ahead and release this script and let people see it. And it's very interesting. It shows that there's a lot more that we didn't know about how this malware got installed, and even some variants of the malware that we never saw. So if you're interested in looking at that script, you can look at this URL here. I'll be glad to publish these slides, afterwards, so you don't have to worry about finding that URL later. So if we fast forward a year, January 10th, 2018, Durchinsky was finally actually indicted on 16 counts. And you can see here there were a number of different counts here, including protection of child pornography and illegal wiretapping. There were actually 5 indicated cases where he listened into conversations between 2 people in the court documents. So a lot of charges here being leveraged against Mr. Durchinsky. Now, fast forward to 2019, in April, the defense filed a motion to suppress evidence. And the reason is they're claiming improper seizure because the FBI did not actually have a warrant at the time that they seized the hardware. The defense wants suppression of all of the evidence obtained from the laptop and Durchinsky's confession, which was evidently given following his arrest and being confronted with the evidence that had been gathered. So that's a problem, obviously, and the prosecution responded in May, and part of their response said that the big reason that they seized that data, that hardware, was because of the blog post that I published on that day. And so there was concern that Durchinsky would delete data, and they wanted to prevent that. So here we've got a problem where I published a blog post, and this had a direct effect on potentially the course of this trial and could be a potential issue for the prosecution. Now, fortunately, the prosecution does have some good arguments for why they were allowed to take that hardware. For example, they took the hardware out of the house, but they didn't actually search it until they got the warrant. And there's apparently a precedent for that, so I don't think that the defense is going to have a case here. But it still concerns me that something that I did might potentially lead to Durachinsky getting away with what he did, and the evidence against him is pretty strong. So if we fast forward to today, this trial is still going on, the debate is still continuing after multiple hearings, and there still has not been a decision reached on whether that evidence will be suppressed or not. So keeping an eye on this case and hoping for the best, hoping that I didn't screw it up for the defense or for the prosecution. So what's the takeaway here? There are a few lessons that we can learn here. Now, first of all, obviously, malware disclosure is important for victims. So we have this malware. It had infected these systems for years. Potentially, some systems were infected for a decade. And these people didn't know about it. So the disclosure was really important to help people find it. So, when we posted our blog post, we had IOCs that could help businesses find the malware. We published hashes that antivirus vendors could use to download that malware and detection. And of course, I had communicated with Apple, so Apple is protecting the user. That's all very important. This is really important for protecting the victims of these crimes. However, on the other side of this, sometimes the disclosure can interfere with the legal process. So that's one of the big things that I learned here. This was fairly early on. It was the first malware that I had found that I was able to come up with a name for and actually give it the first name. Of course, I did kind of a crummy job with it. Nobody calls it by the bad name that I gave it. Everybody calls it by Apple's name, which is FreeFly, even me. But my excitement led me to potentially push this out a little bit sooner than I should have. And if I had been in direct contact with the FBI, then some of this problem could have been avoided. So, what I have learned here is to be more mindful in disclosing. And what I would ask for all of you who are involved in malware investigation to do is to consider engaging with law enforcement when you do find something interesting. And that can be something as simple as some local law enforcement office. You could engage with the FBI fairly directly. You could also consider joining some organizations such as InfraGard here in the US, which is sort of a two-way communication between the FBI. I kind of have some mixed feelings about joining InfraGard because there's a lot of personal data that you have to share in order to join. But if that's not a problem for you, it sounds like you can build a fairly good relationship with law enforcement and really open out cases like this. And obviously some of you are not from the United States, so the FBI is not the one you report to, so find whatever office is appropriate for your country. And continue with the malware disclosure by all means, but please also make sure that you're engaging with law enforcement when you think there's a need to do so. And I hope that you guys enjoyed the story, and I'll be glad to take any questions.
Thomas, I have one question. Where's the hat?
So, yeah, that hat, actually, I've got 3 of them up there, if you can see my picture, up there, behind me. Let me stop sharing here. So, but the hat doesn't fit with the headphones.
That makes sense. Are there any questions for Thomas about the case, his research? Yes.
Yeah, did Apple adopt any formal policy changes in the past 3 years? Because I assume it's probably not your first and last coordination with Apple.
So the question, Thomas, was did Apple change any policies based on this or between when you interacted with them and now?
To be honest, I'm not sure I have a lot of visibility into that. But I think that this was sort of a beginning of having a good relationship with Apple. Or having a better relationship with Apple.
What was the name that you picked for the malware? Corporate play.
What was the name of the malware that you picked before Fruit Fly? And the story behind it.
So I named the malware Twinbitchin, which is a very hard word to pronounce. And basically, it's an Aztec word for spy.
Okay.
So I figured, the malware had this really old code in it. So, and it was spyware. So I looked for a word that meant really old spy.
Awesome. And weren't you able to go to some of the court cases, or it was nearby, or?
Yeah, it is nearby, but I never actually was able to go to any of the cases. I'm hoping to get to go to one at some point, but it's hard to figure out when they're going to be.
And finally, were you concerned at all that during the trial that you perhaps would be called in as a witness, perhaps by either the defense or the prosecution, as you were essentially an expert in this problem?
Yeah, a little bit. It could have been a very interesting experience, but it also, going to testify in court could also be kind of intimidating and time-consuming. So I have mixed feelings about that.
Yes, in the back.
Since Apple was in communication with the FBI, when Thomas reached out to Apple, did Apple give any sort of time frame when they asked you to hold off, or were they just kind of, like a couple of days maybe?
So the question was, Thomas, once you contacted Apple, since Apple was in contact with the FBI, what were the communications there? And did Apple give you a specific timeline to hold off on the blog post, or was it just, hey, you can wait as long as possible?
Yeah, so we did communicate. I knew that the FBI was involved. Apple did tell me that, and we kind of discussed a timeline for the blog post. So we did agree on that day.
Any other questions for Thomas? All right, well, thanks again. Hope you feel better soon, and I know I'll see you at Objective C 4.0, so see you there.
Absolutely.
All right, thanks again, Thomas.
It's been fun.
All right, so that concludes day one of Objective by the Sea 3.0. Thank you all. Let's give one more round of applause for all the speakers who, making slides, come up here and talk. It's a lot of work, can be a little nervous, so so we really want to recognize. So let's give them a round of applause. So tonight we have the party. Starts at 7:30. It's on the Ocean Lanai Terrace. It's actually on this floor. It's a little hard to find. If you go out the conference room and go down the few short stairs, not all the way down the lobby, a few short stairs, and then continue through, there's another door to the right. And if you see that glass door, there's this kind of big open lanai. And so we'll be there. We're going to have some open bar for a few hours. There'll be some light pupus, which is the Hawaiian word for appetizers. And then we'll also have some video games, old school Nintendo games, some big screen set up. So it's going to be super casual, but I'd be stoked if after you all wash your hands, if you showed up, have some drinks, nerd out, and just kind of cruise. So you're all welcome for that. In terms of tomorrow, we'll be starting again bright early-ish at 10 a.m. for the second day of the talks. So hope to all see you at the party, and again, early in the morning tomorrow. So thanks again. Enjoy.
Jared, sorry, my Slack might not have been